we have a very special guest on the line with us tonight. He is former GWF, Global Wrestling Federation, and former World Wrestling Federation superstar and the owner of Big Bully Nutrition. On the line with us, we have Big Bully Busick. How are you doing?
Andrew, JT, what's happening? Let's see, you're on the West Coast, Andrew's on the East Coast, and I'm up in beautiful Steubenville, Ohio. Life is good.
Definitely. Now, we've got a list of questions. Fans have sent us in some questions, so if you don't mind, let's go ahead and get started.
All right, let's have at it, guys.
Now, of course, the first question is a generic question, as always. Growing up, were you a wrestling fan? If so, who'd you look up to?
I was the biggest wrestling fan you ever seen in your life. It started back in Pittsburgh. They had a Saturday night, 6 p.m. It was called Studio Wrestling. The host was Chilly Billy, Bill Cardell, and this was the era when Bruno was coming into his reign, and certainly Bruno was a guy that I actually looked up to in growing up, and yeah, I was a huge fan. I mean, a huge fan.
Now, I take it you probably went to the shows. Did you get the chance to mingle with Bruno? Of course, back in the day they were, huge superstars. Nowadays it's a little easier for fans to get to them, but back then, it was harder. Did you ever get the chance to meet him?
Well, I mean, it's not as if Bruno's a whole bunch older than I am, but you figure if I was 12, Bruno, I don't know what Bruno's age is, but, he was already an adult. So, as I grew up and Bruno's career progressed, it went up through my teen years and up into the 20s until I started in the business. But I did not get a chance to actually mingle with him, but I was the truest sense of a mark that I would follow. I would look for his training habits and his training routines. And then there was other wrestlers in the area. There was Johnny DeFazio, Jumpin' Johnny DeFazio, Dominic DeNucci, Baron Cicluna. These are all guys that I grew up watching. Little would I know that I would wind up in the ring with them.
Mm-hmm. Now, before actually training to become a professional wrestler, you were an active police officer. What was that like, and what made you decide that, hey, I'm going to become a professional wrestler?
Well, we could even go back a little further than that, because professional wrestling played such an influence on me as a child growing up that I fell in love with the sport in itself. I wrestled in high school and I wrestled in college, and thanks to the influence of Bruno, I became a very active power lifter. Well, my first competition was a bodybuilder, but that just didn't go over real well, and I jumped right into powerlifting, and then I had the wrestling in high school, and then I became a cop actually when I just turned 19 years old. They say I may have been the first cop in the United States to be hired under 21. I don't know.
Oh, wow, that's actually a good accomplishment. My next question for you is, of course, back then in those days, wrestling training was a lot harder than these days where they just throw somebody in the ring nowadays. Can you describe to our listeners what your training was like?
Well, I don't know if you might not have that backwards. I mean, certainly by the time I went into the ring, there was a fellow here who was actually from Steubenville, Ohio. His name was Mike Padusis, and Mike was visiting his family, and I grabbed him because there was some influence family ties in the area, because Steubenville is not a big area, but the whole Pittsburgh tri-state area consisted of all steel mill towns. And in each town there was 20,000, 30,000 people. So Mike was from Steubenville, and listen, I just trapped him, and I says, look, I want to learn how to wrestle professionally. And then, at that time I didn't know the business. And no, kid, you're not going to do that, this, that, and the other. And if you don't know Mike Padusis, I would encourage everybody to go ahead and do a Google search on him and take a look at this guy, because he certainly, it was his key influence. He went back home to Dallas, Texas. He was living in Dallas, and I talked him into it. My daughter was just about born. She wasn't born yet, and I talked him into it. And there was another fellow down there. My ethnic background is I'm Serbian, and there was another fellow by the name of Danny Plečić. So I had a little bit. He was Serbian, so between the Greek and the Serbian connection, they taught me how to tie up and take a headlock and shipped me back to Pittsburgh after calling Gorilla Monsoon and booked me in Pittsburgh Civic Arena.
Oh, wow. See, the reason I asked that is because we've interviewed a lot of different people, and a lot of people say that their training back then was a lot tougher. It was a lot more solid on the contact, and from experience just working shows, I've been on shows with guys that have been in training for 2 weeks, learned exactly how to lock up, and then that was it. They were in the ring.
Yeah, well, that's pretty much my story, and the guys. Now, don't forget, back in those days. Well, I had a wrestling background, or what is commonly known as being a shooter. But the guys that I was in the ring with, I had the appearance because of my powerlifting background. Evidently, that played a big influence because these guys would continue. When I say these guys, certainly the influence of Dominic Benucci, Bruno, Gorilla Monsoon. They would continue to book me. And that's how I would learn. I remember for the first 6 or 7 years walking into the locker room, and Cicluna or Johnny Valiant or one of those guys would say, "Oh, who's got the kid tonight? Who's got the crowbar?" You know what I mean? So that the first 6, 7 of my years was when they used local talent, and those guys were good enough to continue to book me, and I started learning the business that way. As far as any formal training, one of the Mongols had a little training camp up in outside of Pittsburgh, and Dominic had some training camps up that I went to from there.
All right. Now, your debut match was against Billy Red Lions. Can you share your memories of that match?
Yes, it was. Well, imagine, like I said, you come back from the airplane. Next thing you know, you're booked. Mike had given me an old pair of wrestling boots, and I got a pair of wrestling tights. And I'll never forget walking out in front of 15,000 people and saying, "Oh, my God, what am I doing?" And when I walked into that ring, I was scared to death. And Billy Red Lions got me through the whole match. There was a referee there by the name of Izzy Moydell, and another guy that I'd watched growing up. And, they got me through the match. Probably what I remember most about that match was certainly the match was terrible. I mean, it had to be, just knowing what I know today. But Billy Red Lions whipped me into a turnbuckle so hard that I distinctly remember that part of the match. But I got through it, and like I said, they continued to book me.
Okay, and during your time when you were in New Jersey and Pennsylvania territories, there's a lot of stories that guys were complaining that you were too stiff in the ring. Do you have any reaction to that?
Well, I was. I mean, and it wasn't intentional. I mean, don't forget, I come from a wrestling background, and I to work what's called loose or whatever. I remember Cicluna kicked me right in the face one night. He was so mad at me because I shot in and did a single leg on him. And I mean, I took him down, and it wasn't that I was trying to be a smart, what. It was just that's what I did, and everything I did was stiff until I continued to learn.
Okay, and in 1984, you left pro wrestling for a while and returned back to active duty with law enforcement. What was your reason at the time for completely leaving the wrestling business?
Well, no, I was a cop up here in the Pittsburgh area from 73 to 83, and that's when they used what was called local talent. So I always used the wrestling as my side income. I stayed in law enforcement and transferred to Atlanta PD, Metro Atlanta, and that's where I wound up meeting Jerry Blackwell and people that Jerry Blackwell, Abdul the Butcher, Dick Slater, Mr. Wrestling 2. That's when I got my so-called push. Jerry Blackwell more or less took me under his wing, and that style, when you talk about working stiff, that's what I was comfortable with, because when you talk about working with the Jerry Blackwells, Abdul the Butchers, Bruiser Brodys, it was a brawl. It was stiff. and Wrestling 2. If I didn't mention these guys, I would be negligent, because they played a huge influence on giving me my actual first push. So back to the question, did I leave law enforcement? I never left law enforcement until I actually went to the WWF, the now WWE.
Now, my next question for you, of course, is how did the Big Bully Busick character come about, and whose idea was it?
Well, it's actually kind of funny, because I knew, when we started this interview, and you guys are around the business, and whoever's listening, certainly they love the business also. I knew if I was ever going to make it in the business, it was time for me to attempt to do something. Certainly, my type of physique, to dye my hair blonde or go with any type of gimmick like that certainly wouldn't work. So what I had done is I made a list of wrestlers that had my type of physical stature: Bulldog Breyer, Crusher Lazowski, Bruno, guys with that type of physical structure. And then I came back to my old setting here in the Pittsburgh area, in the tri-state area, and I mentioned earlier the steel mill towns. Well, you got to understand, in these steel mill towns, there was a shot and beer joint on every corner, if not 2 or 3, in all these cities. And I made a list of the characters from the years that I was a cop up here, because it was Friday and Saturday night at the fights. I mean, these guys would get drunk and the fights were on. So I made a list of these guys and what their mannerisms were and their characteristics. And most of them had a mustache, smoked a cigar, and wore a hat. So I incorporated that into it. And then I watched some Warner Brother cartoons, and I came up with this character, and that was the look. I just didn't know what to name the character. And Joe Pedicino had taken over Georgia Wrestling, and after Jerry had it, and Joe said to me, "You just described a bully, and thus you got Big Bully Busick."
Oh, okay.
And that's when we were getting ready to. They were working on putting the GWF together at that time.
Now, I'm glad you actually brought that up, because that was leading into my next question. Now, of course, while you were with the Global Wrestling Federation, you got the chance of working against Chaz Taylor. A lot of people feel that he never got the push that he deserved. What are your memories of working with him?
Well, Chaz was great. I mean, I remember Chaz. Shawn Michaels used to, when he was down in Georgia, he always used to say, "Loosen up, brother." And I knew that Chaz was going to work similar to the way Shawn did. And so he was very good to work with, type of guy you could stay in the ring with for hours. So my memories are all good of Chaz.
Now, of course, and you even stated this on your Facebook page, you had a match with Bruiser Brody, and during the match you guys brawled outside and the cops were called. What was the reason behind that, and what are your memories of that match?
No, that was with Abdullah the Butcher.
Oh, okay.
There was a match, one match with Brody. In fact, if you do a YouTube search, it's Dick Slater and Bruiser Brody, but it turned out that gentleman Chris Adams and myself came in and we had a tag team match. And if you watch that match, you'll see Brody hit me with a chair. And when I tell you he hit me with that chair, I mean he blasted me. And then also you'll see a kick to the head in that match, which almost knocked me out. And then same thing with Abdullah. I mean, Abdullah, these guys are big men. I remember Jerry Blackwell, Abdullah the Butcher, they used to love to blow guys up. And I remember working on that match that you just referred to. Abby and I were working somewhere in Atlanta at some theater, and Ron Simmons was actually in the crowd too. And anyway, we were all over the place, blood flying everywhere. I mean, Abby was hitting me with everything he can get his hands on, and the owner of the theater, he didn't know what to do. We wound up in the parking lot. Next thing I know, I see blue lights coming. Here comes the cops, and I'm going, "Oh man, we're going to go to jail." So anyway, we worked back into the theater and went home safe and sound without getting locked up.
That's funny.
Now, what were your memories of working for the Worldwide Wrestling Federation?
You mean when it was the WWF?
Yes, but like back in the 1970s.
Well, the business had territories then, and I, like I said, I was very young in the business. I know they had. I got to go do TV a couple times, and I just remember that they would use local talent, and I would go in, sit down, and shut up, and do what I was told to do. That's my memory of it. But you got to also understand that I was young, and I was starstruck when I would walk into those locker rooms. You got to remember, I was such a huge wrestling fan that it took me a long time. Well, in fact, I'll tell you how I stopped becoming starstruck. Jerry Blackwell finally grabbed me one day and said, "Nick, we're all just one of the boys," and that's when it sunk in.
All right, so you were one of the you're on the very short list of wrestlers to work for both Vince McMahon Sr. and Jr. Can you just talk a little bit about the differences between them? Maybe if either one of them was better than the other to work for?
I don't remember having any conversations with Senior at all. When the Bully was introduced and hit ESPN, it wasn't a week later that I got a call from New York. And next thing I know, I was on a plane and on my way to Vince's house. When I landed, my wife had told me that the Atlanta office, NWA, had called. Now, coming from the WWF, I felt like I was home. When I got to Vince's house and we talked and we discussed, I just felt like I was home, and needless to say, I was anxious to work. I wanted to work. The character, Vince loved the characterization, and he put me on the payroll immediately. I didn't have my first match for about 6 months after he put me on the contract.
Okay, and at this time when you were working for Vince Jr., that was a time where Bobby Heenan was not really a manager anymore. He was primarily an announcer, and you were paired with Harvey Whippleman. He was at the time he was really the primary heel manager. How did it feel to be paired with at that level with him, and just maybe a couple memories of just kind of spending time with him?
Well, I really didn't know Harv until we got up there. I knew he was friends with Sid, coming from Memphis. Sid and I were training partners along with the Iron Sheik, and so they wanted to put him with somebody, and they did, and certainly Big Bully Busick gave Harvey Whippleman the push that was needed to get him over.
Okay, and do you have any memories of wrestling Sid Justice?
Yeah, we did when I was bullying McGurk, Mike McGurk, in the ring, and then Sid come out and made the big save, and well, it was just a short-lived thing, and Sid did the big power slam, and for a 290-pound guy at the time, I come up pretty easy with that, didn't I?
I actually just recently saw that match. It was pretty good. Now, my next question for you is, and we talked about this a little bit before we went on the air. You had the opportunity to work with some guys who passed before their prime, like Davey Boy Smith, a.k.a. the British Bulldog, and Kerry Von Erich. Got any memories you can share of working with those guys?
Oh, well, yeah, I do. I mean, Davey Boy, I could tell you, I would let him do a standing suplex with me on the concrete. That's how good he was. And Kerry was just what a super guy this guy was. When I broke in down in Dallas, his father was good enough to let Paducas and Plechic take me into the ring at the Sportatorium. And, Kerry, both were class guys. I really enjoyed the time I got to work with them and be on the road with them.
Yeah, of course, they were both phenomenal athletes. Now, in 1991, you left the WWF. What was the reason behind that?
The main reason was my kids were starting to grow up, and I wanted to be with my family. I mean, that's the bottom line of it. It seems, as I sit back and people with the entourage of the internet and doing interviews like this, certainly YouTube and the internet has resurrected a lot of guys like myself and actually brought the characters back to life. And, when it comes to goal setting, I can distinctly remember before I went into the ring, before I actually was able to go in, I visualized myself in Madison Square Gardens. I distinctly remember this. And when that match was over with Kerry Von Erich, I remember coming out of the ring and saying, I'm done, that's it. So I didn't set my goals as high as I should have, but I remember saying, okay, I achieved what I wanted to achieve. And it was like I said, that's it, I'm done.
Now, of course, you're still in phenomenal shape, of course, through your nutrition business. Have you ever thought about giving it one more run?
No, I haven't. I do a lot of strength training for some MMA guys, Mark Coleman's Hammer House. I train with those guys. I'm very active in youth and high school wrestling. In fact, I'm a high school wrestling referee. We have a gym here in Steubenville that has been deemed a regional Olympic training center, so we're getting ready to open that up. And so my focus is on that. My kids are grown up now. In fact, my oldest boy, he's going to be in Vegas here next weekend for the Police Olympics. He's going to be doing some submission wrestling. And the youngest boy, Bronco Busick, he's playing at West Virginia, middle linebacker.
Oh, wow, very cool. Now, of course, and I've brought this up a couple times. Currently, you own Big Bully Nutrition. Can you tell our listeners about this and what your motivation for starting it was?
I have a couple cardiologist friends that wanted to start this business, and so we had bought, there's a chain of fitness centers called LA Fitness, and inside LA Fitness they have a franchise cafe which distributes protein shakes and all your nutritional stuff. And I had a sudden death cardiac arrest on a treadmill, and so I just started researching a lot of these supplements. And I've been around it my entire life. I mean, we sat and figured, my boys and I, and they said, Dad, do you realize that you started this when you were 15 years old and you're 56 now? You average 3 to 4 times a week in the gym, and you haven't missed. So I've been around it forever, probably longer than you guys have been on planet Earth. And I still have a great passion for it. And so the sudden death cardiac arrest issue came up, and there's a lot of athletes are familiar with stuff that's called nitric oxide, and that's a gas inside the blood that promotes circulation. Well, they also use it for heart conditions, and so what I did is I took that and I put it in a protein bar, and that'll be in your local GNC stores here first week in September. So here's a shameless plug. Walk into a GNC store, ask for the Bully's Nitric Oxide 5000 bar.
I'll definitely have to put that on our website and in the recap as well. One of our listeners, Wacko Bob, actually sent in a question of what is your memories of working with Marty Gianetti on the independent scene?
I got a chance to work with Marty and Shawn Michaels down in Georgia. They were certainly their career was starting to peak, and we were at I believe it was Marietta, Georgia. And it was one of the shows. Kurt Hennig was on the show, and needless to say, Jerry Blackwell had the resources to bring in all the top names. So those guys, if you go back, they were along with the Rock and Roll Express. That's when flying really started to happen in the business.
I would agree with you on that. Another question from one of our listeners is, do you have a rib or a road story you can share with our listeners?
Pardon me?
One of the questions that was sent in is, do you have a rib or a road story you can share with our listeners?
Let's see. There's so many of them. You sort of took me off balance on that one. Certainly, my time with the Iron Sheik has always been nothing but favorable. how many times we walked into a gym and, the Sheik is so serious that if you were on a piece of equipment or something and you were just bullshitting, the Sheik would go off on somebody if you weren't in there training. So we had a lot of fun time with that. And there's a host, Mr. Wrestling 2. We'd be coming back from a road trip, and he wouldn't let guys out of the car to stop and use the restroom just to torture them. Dick Slater, there's another guy who just went out of his way to help me. And so, yeah, there's a host of stories, but they were all favorable.
Now, you actually, if I'm not mistaken, you just brought up Mr. Wrestling 2, who actually is currently in a hospital after suffering a heart attack. When was the last
Really? I didn't know that.
Yeah, when was the last time you talked to him? Yeah, it was just reported a couple days ago that actually he was put into the hospital after having a serious heart attack. So.
Well, and maybe after the show, you can shoot me an email and give me some updates on that. Is he still in Hawaii?
No, actually, he's in Charlotte, North Carolina. The actual news, it says pro wrestling legend Mr. Wrestling 2 suffered a heart attack and is in the hospital. There's an address as well where you can send encouragement.
Well, good. I'll have to make sure I do that.
And, we just have, one more question for you, and that's what does the future hold for Big Bully Busick?
Well, right now I'm chasing the youngest boy in the college football scene. I'll be watching that. He also has both boys had big wrestling backgrounds. He may jump back into the wrestling game because he's definitely a wrestler that's playing football. So I'll focus my attention on just being a dad and a fan of college football. Continue to do the strength training with what athletes I have and working with them, high school referee. My daughter's an animal control officer and a canine trainer. So Big Bully Busick's life's filled up, chasing the wife around with no kids in the house. I get to play slap and tickle once in a while with her. She's probably going to kill me for saying that, but she ran the roads so many years up and down, and always was a great encouragement. And I got to give her a big plug too, because when I told her that, look, if I'm going to make it in the business, I got to either get to the NWA or the WWF, and she worked and supported us while I went out and worked all these independent shows in order to get my name out there. So, I got to give a big plug to her and the way she did things, feeding us. I know Sid and Sheik and myself would come home from the workouts, and she'd have a big meal prepared. And so, I'm very active. I'm very, very active.
Now, do you still do appearances like, NWA Legends Fest, of course, does an annual thing. Do you ever do the autograph signings and stuff?
I did one, and I got a call here last month to go do another one. It seems as if the Big Bully character, although short-lived in the WWF, had a major impact. One fellow said, for the shortest period of time, had the biggest impact. And it really is amazing how many people do remember the Bully character, and that's why we just used the Bully characterization right along with our nutrition line. And the website's no5000.com, so you can see how we capitalized on the creation of the Bully and the likeness of such.
Well, I'd like to thank you for coming on, and, once again, I want to plug the Big Bully Nutrition. Of course, you gave out the website, and it's going to be in store soon, so fans got to definitely check that out. Thank you very much for joining us.
Well, listen, thanks for having me, and well wishes to all the fans out there, and a special thank you, because if it wasn't for the fans, none of us would get to pursue our dreams that were in professional wrestling.
That is very true. Thank you once again.
Take care, guys.
All right, you too.